Idaho and the western states follow the legal rule of prior appropriations to determine who gets water. There's a long list of uses. The single largest water user in the state is agriculture. Prior appropriations determines water use based on a first-come, first-served method. Those who got here first and put the water to use are known as senior water users, and anyone who came later, junior water users. The first settlers to Idaho immediately put all this water to use, building canals to divert water. Rivers and streams are known as surface water. In later years, we learned how to pump water out of the ground. That is known as groundwater. That's why groundwater users typically have more junior water rights. For a long time, we managed surface water and groundwater separately. But that changed. Roger Chase, chairman of the Idaho State Water Board, explains.
Well, one of the best things we've done in Idaho, we recognize that groundwater and surface water are the same water. And the best example of that is just go down to Thousand Springs. And that's the water that comes out from the aquifer and it goes into the Snake River. And so actually in Idaho, we recognize that both of them were sources of water and they're connected. And that's what conjunctive management is to recognize that groundwater and surface water are connected at some point. Surface water goes into the ground and makes groundwater. And that's kind of why you call it conjunctive, because they're connected.
In years where we get plenty of snow and rain, there's enough to go around. But in drought, first in time is first in right favors senior water users. The junior water users may have to do without. That's known as curtailment. Tim Deeg represents the groundwater users.
We're talking about the livelihoods of these farmers. So this gets right to the heart of their issue, right to the heart of their livelihood. Without water, they cease to exist. And the economy in this area will change, and for the worse.
In 2015, Director of the Idaho Department of Water Resources, Gary Spackman, issued a delivery call to hundreds of water users in southern Idaho, ordering them to stop using water. Speaker of the House, Scott Bedke, jumped in and helped lead the charge to find a way to reverse the water calls, an agreement known as the Surface Water Coalition Settlement Agreement. Hal Anderson represents Recharge Development Corporation, the sponsor of this week's symposium.
Where the junior groundwater users reached an agreement with the senior surface water users going, if we meet certain criteria, certain guidelines, then we can drop the litigation. It's a settlement agreement then, so the entities can then have a boundary or sideboards on how they're going to operate into the future.
And I got to applaud Speaker Bedke for moving forward, because he got us both at the table. There were concessions on both sides. Don't ever think there weren't. And so I feel good that we at least have a direction we can go and we can be a part of the solution.
That brings us back to the meeting in Idaho Falls this week. The immediate result is junior water users will have to reduce the amount of water they use, so senior water users get the water they need. This isn't good news for farmers like Robert Murdoch.
This new agreement is even more bad. We're struggling on tough financial times to make ends meet, and now we're supposed to cut between 12 and 13%. And this is going to be devastating to Eastern Idaho. In realistic terms, how we're going to have to implement this is we're going to have to go out and dry up ground that we've paid for, that we have mortgages on. We have to pay all our usual costs associated with that ground, and now we will get no production out of that ground.
Murdoch says the income margin for farmers is roughly 3 to 5%, so a reduction in crops could be devastating. The agreement also hits senior surface water users as well. They have to reduce their water use, or in the case of farmers in the Aberdeen-Springfield area, they utilize both surface water and groundwater. Steve Hauser manages the Aberdeen-Springfield Canal Company.
In order for us to do managed recharge to kind of protect our shareholders from these unintended consequences of the settlement agreement, we're probably going to have to figure out ways to conserve water. And obviously, one of the best ways that we can conserve water with our level of loss is to line the canal.
If you line the canals, it prevents aquifer recharge on the canal lines. That's just one example of the difficulties those in eastern Idaho face under this new settlement agreement. Recharge Development Corporation believes there's a better way. Again, Hal Anderson.
Or the other alternative, and one that we're particularly interested in and promoting, is the idea of recharging the aquifer to build up the aquifer to provide a supply for those junior groundwater users so they don't have to stop production, so they don't have to take land out of production. Both of them have the same effect on the aquifer. Idaho, in my opinion, I've been in the water business my entire career, does not have a water supply problem. Idaho has a water management problem.
The plan would take water flowing in the Snake River when farmers don't need it, for instance, in the early spring or late fall, and use the water to recharge the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer.
There is enough water to go around. We know that. Every year the average that goes out of the state that we could use is 1 million acre feet a year. We're trying to come up with 500,000 acre feet to make a difference. We can meet everybody's needs.
The traditional way of doing this is holding water in storage, using reservoirs like American Falls and Palisades. The reason we lose this water is because operators of the dams have to spill water in the spring to avoid flooding and damage to the dams and reservoirs. But when the water flows past the dam, it's gone, and farmers lose that water forever. The solution is more storage capacity.
Well, where it comes from, there's water every year that leaves Idaho. And part of that water we have to let go down for fish flush and things like that. But we have water we don't use in Idaho that we actually own. And the idea is to find a way to capture that water. And what we're going to do is that usually we irrigate in the summertime. And in the winter we have canals that don't have water in them. And we're going to try to put water in those canals in the winter, and then it just percolates down into the ground just as it used to do naturally. And then we also have little sites where maybe we take water out into a sinkhole or someplace and put water there, make sure it's clean, and we monitor it. But that's how we're going to make it work and get to that number, is use the existing systems we have and use them when they're not being used. We can do that without building a dam, because again what we're using the aquifer becomes our reservoir.
In short, all these canals not used in the off-season will have water in them year-round, not for agriculture, but to seep into the ground and recharge the aquifer. More water in the aquifer means groundwater pumpers won't have to turn their pumps off. It also means more water filling the Snake River at places like Thousand Springs. That's where the plan to line the canals in the Aberdeen-Springfield Canal Company isn't popular, and Hauser knows that.
That is an issue, but we have an 1895 water right, and these in the settlement agreement, it could potentially have these consequences, these unintended consequences on us, and our job is to protect our shareholders.
In Hauser's case, by lining his canal, helps his senior water users make use of every drop of water flowing in the canals. That's just one example of the difficulties this plan faces. Don't expect that it's going to be easy here on out. More drought, earlier spring runoff, and competing uses will cause tension on an already fragile relationship.
And I still will kind of blame the state for a lot of the problems here, because they haven't administered their own water policy of zero flow past Milner. And they haven't followed their own policies that would have kept the aquifer healthier, because they've allowed the water to go past Milner's in these times because they've never spent the money for recharge. When Roger Chase said that Washington State spent $200 million for recharge, look at what we're spending. And somebody said, there was an editorial where they said the pumpers should pay for this recharge. You know, if the pumpers could own the water, I think we'd be happy to pay for the recharge if we could actually own the water in the aquifer.
And joining us here at this table is Speaker of the House, Scott Bedke. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Speaker. One of the first things that we just saw was this discussion over recharging the aquifer. Mm-hmm. This comes after that big settlement agreement from last year that you were a big part of. How important was that decision, and how do we move forward from here?
Well, the agreement that the two parties entered into will be monumental. I think when we have this conversation in 10 years, we'll look back to that agreement the way we look back to the Swan Falls agreement. I think it's of that magnitude, because we're able to put to rest this ongoing conflict. Robert Frost said that good fences make good neighbors, and that's because we know where my property rights stop and where yours start. And so with the with the court decisions that happened last April, we know where those property rights stop and start. And from that basis, we were able to craft a settlement between the two parties that I think that will serve both the senior surface water group well into the future, and also the groundwater or junior group. Both sides just want stability. They want predictability with their water. It's critically important to the Magic Valley, because that's where there's more food processing and value added happening in the Magic Valley literally than any other concentration in the world, and the underpinnings of that is the water. And so it's important for the dairy industry. It's important for all of the food processors that are there. It's just, to put this issue behind us is a big thing. So you'll see the legislature. We've got some concurrent resolutions that will basically ratify or applaud the settlement. Number one, there are three of them. One will also state this, that the state's goal is to have a more robust managed recharge program. In other words, we're going to put water from the river that would otherwise go to the ocean, put that in the aquifer to address these shortages, and at the same time start this process in the other parts of the state, and including here in the Treasure Valley. Frankly, the issues here are going to be more complex than they were there, and if we follow the matrix that we set up in the Magic Valley here, then we can avoid a lot of the mistakes that arguably we made down there.
The plan that's on the table right now from the Recharge Development Corporation is to utilize water that's flowing down the Snake River in the off seasons, and use that water to recharge. I imagine, and what they were talking about over in the Idaho Falls area earlier this week was that a lot of this could be done as is. We don't have to build new dams. We don't have to do a lot of infrastructure there, but they are going to need some support from the state. There's probably going to take some money to help manage all of the moving parts here. Do you feel that the legislature will be able to come up with money enough to help them go forward, and how do you make that sell to the legislators?
Well, I think that I'm in hopes that it will sell. The governor revised his budget after about 10 days in, when we got all the plans back and all of the pro formas and the business and the construction schedules. We will need to build some diversion works or resurrect some old ones. And the good news is that there's a lot of water that leaves the state every year. The problem is it happens in the spring of the year, for 4, maybe 6, 8 weeks, and to find areas that will drink that much water in that short amount of time is going to be a challenge. But we're recharging as we speak in the Magic Valley now, and in eastern Idaho. We're using, back in the day we cussed the federal government because of a biological opinion about having to leave water coming down the river for a snail that lives in the rapids below Minidoka Dam. And they have to always let 500 CFS go by. Well, we are now catching that in the dam below Minidoka at Milner, and we're putting that out in the existing canal systems all winter long, and that's going into the aquifer, and that is going to be a great help on reaching the goal. It's not going to get us clear to the goal of 250,000 acre feet, and so we've got to augment that by turning more water out of the river in everywhere from St. Anthony down, and to hit the goal. But the good news is we're not like California or some of these other states that don't have the water to work with. We have the water to work with.